and welcome to the Plenty of Positivity podcast. I am your host, Courtney Beck, and today we have an incredible guest, Jeff McKeon. Jeff is a Chief Growth Officer at NeuroCapability. He is also a speaker, a coach, and a mentor. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Jeff McKeon.
Thanks, Courtney. So excited to be here. It's always good to speak to someone else in the world who's trying to just bring a different light to the world and share a different way of looking at the world. And I've chosen positivity, and that's why you and I connected. Out of 8 billion people in the world, that's why we're having this conversation today.
Absolutely. I am all about positivity, obviously. And I do remember our conversation on LinkedIn. Literally, when I first started the business, I had reached out to you. I saw positivity all over your LinkedIn, and I was like, I have to have him on the podcast. So I also want to congratulate you, Jeff, because you are the first Australian guest to be on this podcast.
That's pretty exciting. I'm pretty happy to be out there. There's 26 million of us, and the fact that you chose me to be your first Australian, I'm pretty happy about that, Courtney.
Absolutely. Well, I'm thrilled to get this started. I want to let our listeners know that obviously we're going to get to know Jeff and his background, but we are also going to dive into some very important topics such as neuroscience, leadership, and of course, positivity. So, Jeff, if you could please begin with a brief introduction.
I love the way, Courtney, you say brief introduction. It's like, how much do you need? How much do you want? So let me try and give you the helicopter overview of,
Sure.
I am a person who has chosen positivity, and I've come from places that weren't also always positive. You know, I had quite a difficult childhood, quite a traumatic childhood, and it's not necessarily the space for here, but it's part of the origin story.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent 25 years in the motor industry and sales, the high pressure world of selling all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I'm still positive. So difficult childhood, stress related, stress focused business of always go, 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 sell, sell, sell. And I'm still a really positive guy. So somewhere I've learned something from my teenage years where luckily I didn't become a statistic. Let's just leave it at that. There's a story there that I'm still here. And my best friend's mum, a hug from her saved my life. That's a whole different story, but it's knowing that you can come from somewhere dark and end up somewhere that's really positive. So you just got to pay attention to the lessons that life is trying to teach you, because life is a consistent teacher. It's relentless. It will always teach you. And it always comes down to you have a choice. And I think that's where positivity is a choice. And I always will choose positivity no matter what the circumstance is. Doesn't stop the bad stuff of life happening. That's what's really important for people to understand. This is not toxic positivity and rainbows and unicorns, because life is not like that.
Right.
Bad stuff happens, and you've got to sit with the bad stuff. But when you understand that you have a choice to make, that's entirely up to you. I'll always choose positivity. Was that brief enough?
That's a fantastic introduction, Jeff. And I couldn't agree with you more. And the focus on positivity, what was so interesting, literally why I started going into this direction, I have always been, relatively speaking, a positive person. Like you said, bad things happen in our lives. We have to overcome certain challenges. But at the same time, I do agree with you that it truly is a choice.
Yes.
Beginning in sport, something that taught me about the always keeping a positive mindset was this idea of, truthfully, like, what was negativity? How was that actually going to help you if you were having a bad day in sport? And we would be in the gym, upon hours, and I would think to myself, okay, I still have, 2 more events to go. And maybe I am having a bad day, not like a normal day like I would have, but how could I at least alter my mindset And I think from the sport of gymnastics, that's what really taught me about choosing a positive mindset. And so it's interesting that you mention the corporate experience too that you've had. And something I really want to get into when you talk about being, it was on your LinkedIn, but being a beacon of positivity. Was there like one moment, if you will? I know you said you chose positivity, but what really escalated that thought process?
It was probably going on about 10 years ago now. I started reading, and I mean reading a lot.
Yeah.
And I came across a piece of research by Sonia Lovomirsky, and it spoke about how we have a happiness set point. Essentially, 50% of who we are is either mildly happy or not so happy, right? So that's set by our family and who we are. 10% is impacted by life. And you go, oh, hang on, I thought it would be bigger than that. Life would, no, 10%. The 40% is up to you. So it's what do you do with your life? And I started getting really intentional about my choices and my decisions and what I would look for in people and how I would speak to people and all of those sort of things. Because when you're in sales and you're hyper competitive, that you're taught to ignore all of that stuff, right? And I couldn't hold the two anymore. I couldn't sit with the greed or the hyper focus of always win and in the sales and go, yeah, but that's not who I am. So over time, I started to come apart in these two different ways. So I was always about positivity, always about looking for the good in people, looking for kindness. And in a sales role, that's actually really quite conflicting because you're taught the opposite way. So I was in management, and so I was always talking about how do I help my people as opposed to how do I get the results. If I focus on my people, the results are going to come naturally as a byproduct of what I'm doing. So I got really clear on focusing on them, on looking after them and caring for them. And of course, the results started going up exponentially, getting better and better and better because it was the looking at your daily activities and the
Mhm.
lead measure activities, the thing you do each day, which impacts the result. So rather than talking about sales, I would make sure, how are you feeling? Are
Mhm.
you okay? Is everything going right? Do you need time off? By showing genuine care to the people that were working for me, they performed better. So ultimately, I got a higher result. I actually had to do less work because it was more about looking after the people. And that's when I went, oh, this positivity stuff really works because I put it into play and I put it into practice with the people in my care.
That's incredible. And something I could certainly relate to that. I was in sales. It was for a short stint. But what I can say, the managers that I had, it was two different companies, but they always did focus on positivity. And to your point, it can be, should I say, high stress. You always have to
Yes.
make your numbers.
Yes.
And, I think to your point, though, in sales, I always liked to focus too alongside the product that I was selling, of course, but the relationship building.
Yes.
I was in pharmaceutical sales, so I was in offices, of course. And every time I would go in there, I think it even made the job more fun too by
Mm.
getting to know the people. And yes, they knew why you were there, but at the same time, really can say though the stress that did come with it, sometimes I was able to manage it because it was like, it really truly was the mindset I think that you keep, and how important keeping that positive mindset when you go to conferences or seminars, when you're with the team, it really brings the team up. So I want to expand upon that. Like you said, you were in management for a pretty long period of time. When did you start gearing in this direction to pull a team together with positivity? Was it just one moment that hit, or was it kind of over time, like you said, just through reading books that you started altering the way you managed people?
So there was a particular book, and it's Four Disciplines of Execution,
Mm.
and that's from the team at Franklin Covey. And that was all about focusing on what do you do each day that moves the needle over here. And sometimes it's really hard to find it. But I was reading so much about how to look after people, how to care for people that you were leading, and then they would respond and thrive. If you create an environment where your people thrive, they produce more. They produce above and beyond what you expect.
Mhm.
And so that was the big focus, and that came from a lot of reading. I remember and I've kept a Word document. It ended up becoming about 200 pages long of LinkedIn articles, and it was
Wow.
September 2015. I can't remember the date. It'll be on the file somewhere. And I started saving them and
Mhm.
reading them as an article. I just created this. Pretty much, I created a book before AI did it, and just came up with just all these LinkedIn articles that I started reading. And so I started reading every day. I kept putting information in every single day, and it was always, how do I make more positive changes, and how do I get better so that I can influence the people around me? And that
Sure.
was, how do I be the best version of myself rather than selling, right? So
Mhm.
I came from I was a swimmer, state level swimmer as a teenager. So hyper competitive, super focused on me winning, right? It's really easy to do. If it's just you get really good at trying to win. And so in sales, of course, that was perfect. Sales driven is about getting the win. So I went, oh, how else? I feel like I'm winning, every day I do this, right? But when you're focusing on people, it's not about the winning. It's about how do you look after the people, and then the result comes. So when you're in that space of looking for those improvements and you enter a growth mindset yourself, the
Mhm.
people around you are going to come along, or they're not. And that's okay. So if there's a person who doesn't get it, that's all right. They're on a different journey. We're all on a different timeline. We all learn differently. Our brains are all wired differently. We have the same basic neuroanatomy, but every single one of us has a different life experience. So I won't ever think the way you do, because our brains experience totally different things growing up. So if someone wants to join us and come along on that, it'll be really successful. It'll be a lot of fun, and it'll reduce the stress of being told you must sell. And that's the difference. Focus on the care of the people. So I used to talk about, I measure success based on how much they're laughing, how much my team
Oh,
is laughing, right?
I love
Because
that.
in some offices you go, it's silent, and it's like, oh, what a terrible place to go to every day. I want to hear people laugh. I know that they'll be doing the work, because you can use the KPIs that tell you that the work's getting done. But are
Sure.
they genuinely having fun with their friends? You
Mhm.
know, your work colleagues can make or break the experience. Your manager has as bigger impact on your well-being at work. This is data from last year, maybe year before, but
Mhm.
your manager at work has as bigger impact on you as your doctor on your well-being. So if you've got a great manager, you have a great time. If you have a bad manager, you have a pretty bad time. And we've all worked for both. And I know which one I'd rather be, and I know which one I'd rather work for. So then that became we talk about, what is your why, right? My
Mhm.
why is to plant trees under whose shade I'll never sit.
Oh, I love that.
So if I can share my wisdom and my experience without judgment, and up to the person what they do with it, I'm not here to tell people what to do. That never works, Courtney. We
Yeah.
can't instruct someone to go and do that unless you're a direct coach giving them a specific process, right?
Sure. Sure.
We can give them the information and encourage them to explore themselves and get curious about it and see what they can learn. But once again, people's rates of learning are totally different. I laugh and I talk about having my 25-year gap year. That was my time in the sales, right? I've spent more time reading and studying in the last 5 years than I did in the first 25 years. And so it becomes a choice. And so once you get curious, you then start going, oh, what else can I learn? What else can I find out? And so
Mhm.
that's when the choice of being positive for me, comes from a quote. It was attributed to Viktor Frankl, and quite often online it is. It's also referenced by Stephen Covey. But the reality is they just talked about it. It never appeared in specifically a Viktor Frankl quote, just the world of the internet. But between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is your power to choose.
Mm.
And that is your strength and your growth. So what does that mean? In any situation, when you learn you have a choice, you can choose what you want. You just have to understand that life is going to be throwing this at you all the time. It's up to you to decide what you're going to do in any given situation. We
See,
already have built into us an inbuilt, it's called the negativity bias. Your brain has, part of it is designed to scan the environment for what's wrong. And it's really good at it because it's trying to keep you alive. The bad news is social media and digital platforms manipulate our negativity bias, and they always show us the worst stuff rather than the balanced stuff. It's your job to choose in real life whether or not you're going to hang on to all the bad stuff, or you're going to go, oh yeah, that's just called life. What's the good stuff? I'd rather hang on to the good stuff.
wow, Jeff, there are so many questions that we have now. So, to first begin, I want to dive more into, you were just touching upon it, but the negativity that can be witnessed, whether it's on the internet in general or specifically on social media platforms. And
Yes.
literally, why I started what I'm doing now, it was right after I graduated last December. I was at home. I actually could breathe. I could enjoy life right after graduation. And with that time, I started to realize as I would explore literally the world and what was occurring, not just within the lens of sport, I began to see that it seemed to me, at least from my perspective, there was just a lot of negativity on the internet. I would open up a story, it just always seemed to be negative. And as I mentioned previously, I'm a pretty positive person, but when I was even becoming a little bit dampened by it, it was kind of that light bulb moment that perhaps a lot of people out there could be experiencing the same thing. And what if there was a place for, positivity? I'm sure there's many more spaces, but that's why I started it. So I really would love to hear your part as far as your expertise on perhaps that negativity and then associating it with social media platforms and just the internet.
So to probably clarify it and make sure, and I touch on what my role has been recently is
Sure.
in the work I do for NeuroCapability. I'm not a neuroscientist.
Mhm.
However, what we do is we take neuroscience and the learning of neuroscience and apply it to life and leadership is probably the best way to do it. What have we learned? What has science
Mhm.
learned recently? How do we apply that to a leadership model and life experience? What we know with our negativity bias is a bit like a smoke detector, a fire detector, smoke alarm in
Sure.
your kitchen. What it does is obviously tells it there's stuff wrong. Now, as you're walking along, your brain and your eyes are scanning the horizon all the time, looking for something
Mhm.
wrong because that's its job. It's to protect you from danger. When we're looking online, you can get all the world's problems in one place, right in front of you. So then suddenly you go, oh, everything's bad. No, because it's not balanced, right? So the negativity bias is designed to keep you safe from harm within your environment. But
Uh,
if there's a problem somewhere else, it's like, well, that's not going to impact me going down the street today, but that's how it might feel pretty soon if that's all you're doing. And the best way I've heard it described, the analogy is you wouldn't let your smoke detector stop you from cooking, but that's what we're starting to do.
wow.
We're starting to see all the negativity that
Mhm.
is on a platform, the digital platform, which our brains were never designed to cope with that much information. The brain has taken so long to evolve, and yet we've had this acceleration of digital information and digital deluge in such a short period of time. I mean, the iPhone 2006, was it 2007, whenever that was, and social media
Mhm.
on phones 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And so there's all these massive digital changes coming. But what's happening is because we can get all the negativity, you're pretty much saying, "Oh, I'm not going to cook because my smoke alarm," and that's the negativity. That's what people are feeling around the world, because you have this digital device that can portray that into your face, or on your phone, or on your screen, wherever it is. And ultimately, the digital platforms are vying for your attention to
Yeah.
sell it to advertisers.
Mhm.
So our attention is what is at stake. So then it becomes really important to having what we call attentional intelligence. Is what am I putting my energy in, and what choice am I making with my time? Because the one thing we have is time.
Mhm.
And so, okay, so to give you an idea, right now, and I talked before about lead measure, lag measure. My lead measure, the thing that I do now, I measure my success based on the number of hours I spend with my teenagers,
Mhm.
right? That time is finite. I will never, ever get that time back. They're 19 and 17. I have literally 12 months left. Um, and so for me, success is completely defined by time as opposed to money. So a lot of people see success as being money. And
Mhm.
if money is being used to buy you time, then that's great. But what happens is that money is used to buy stuff, not necessarily time with those that matter most. Because who's going to be standing at the grave?
Yeah.
It's not going to be, it might be your co-workers if you die young enough at your job, but probably not. It's certainly not going to be your stuff. Your stuff's not going to be there beside you. It's going to be your family and friends. And isn't that the measure of what's important in life? Is the circle, is the people around you, and the quality of those people in your life. And if I choose
Mhm.
positivity and the people around me are accepting of that, then they stay in my circle. If they're not, that's okay. They're on their journey in life. I can't change them. I can only influence them by my positivity. But I can't make them be different. I can't change them. I can only try and influence them. But ultimately, it's up to them. So I
Yeah.
do things not because what I'm going to get in return. I do it because it makes me feel better.
Oh, that's a really good way of looking at your life, the choices you make, the time that we have. Because I do feel like in this world today, everything is like 100, plus miles per hour, and we're just constantly going. Everybody's busy. And the one thing I've even noticed in my life is I'm trying to be more cognizant of how I use my time and balancing it more
Yes.
because for example, recently, simple interactions, going to the grocery store, for example, speaking to people, but having meaningful conversations, asking that, one more question that could maybe lead to a common interest. And I've mentioned this, but it's happened so frequently as of recently that I took that next step to ask that question and you felt as if that interaction was more meaningful before you left. It wasn't transactional.
Yep.
You're going through the grocery line, you're paying for the groceries. Did you find everything? Yes, pay, leave. But it was more meaningful with that individual. And so when you talk about the time spent with your sons and making that a intentional decision as far as the balance that you have with life, with business, career. I think that's wonderful. But I do have to say, I really think more so than ever today, we have to be very cognizant and more in tune to that time because you could easily, I feel like, get caught up with work because as we know, especially with those who are doing remote work, it seems like maybe it could mesh all the way, around the clock, so to speak. So My next question, speaking of remote work in the workplace, work culture, being in management like you were in the corporate environment, did you see the transition into that remote working space like through COVID? And how did you maybe maneuver that? Or if you were not, what did you see in reflection of how the world changed with remote work?
So to give my timeline, it just was one of those life circumstances you could never have predicted. I'd made the decision to leave my industry at the same time as COVID closed the doors.
Oh,
So I
wow.
literally left the motor industry and walked away from it completely as we went into lockdown here in Australia. And that was a great separation of time to say, righto, I'm done with that part of my career. Now it's time for me to explore something else. And I said to my wife recently, I had to go and do my apprenticeship in this whole new industry, this whole new world. So I knew what I was doing, very, very good at what had been doing in Toyota, but life
Mhm.
changed and evolved. So to me, learning Zoom was just, this is what we do now because we're on Zoom. I didn't have to worry about what we used to do because suddenly, this is all new, right? One great thing, there are two things that I just were so simple, but one was great is I would wear work boots every day. And when I finished work, I had what I call leaving large process. So take the work boots off, and I would call out to my wife, who would be a couple of rooms down, and go, "I'm on my way home. I'll see you soon." Now, what that was a separation from I've finished working for the day. I'm coming
Wow.
home to
Mhm.
spend time with my family. Um,
Yes. Mm.
and my son taught me that lesson. And so I've got a son and a daughter, and my son was about 11 or 12, and I was working on a really big contract. So he's now 19. And I said to him, Dad's working on this big contract, and it's going to take a lot of extra hours. I'm going to have to work more hours, that, blah, blah, all these things, talking to him. And he got really sad and he got really upset. And he said, Dad, I just want you home in the afternoon to play cricket in the backyard.
Mhm.
He just wanted to play sport with his dad in the backyard. And that
Mm.
floored me. I started crying, going, "Oh my God, he just
Mhm.
wants his dad." And it was right at that time, like at 11 or 12, the really pivotal time in a child's age for their value. So what I
Sure.
did was I made a decision that I put an alarm in my phone, 4:45 every afternoon, and we put in it, and he wrote in it, time
Mhm.
to come home, Dad, love TJ. And that
Mhm.
alarm would appear at 4:45 every afternoon. If I was going to leave on time, I'd send a message saying, I'm on my way, see you soon.
Mhm.
Um, and then if not, I would say, no, I can't make it. So at least he would know. Now that
Sure.
changed our relationship, the father-son relationship, because what I said to him is that he matters
Yeah.
and work didn't. Now, what I ended up doing is I would come home at that time, spend the time in the afternoon with him and my daughter and my wife. And then at night, I'd get work done. I'd work later at night. And ironically, I used to get more work done because there were no phones, no emails, and no customers. So I'd be working away at night, getting so much work done because I wasn't getting interrupted. So it actually worked out. I became more efficient by doing it that way. Um, but what it's meant is my relationship with my son and my daughter is wonderful because I chose them, not work
Mhm.
or money.
I think that's so interesting because as I reflect upon my childhood, my father raised me as a single parent. And I look back, and the one thing that really stands out when you talk about really demonstrating to the child, the young adult, that they matter, specifically in certain ages of their life,
Yeah,
there was a time when, as I would mature and I reflected, I mean, it was as simple as a Friday night we would play this. This was the days of Nintendo, okay?
yeah,
Like Super Mario Kart. But the reason I say that is it was a distinct memory that there was a choice. There was a choice that he could have utilized his time in a totally different matter, whether it was work, whether it was social life, or he could have spent it with me. And he always chose that.
Chose
And I
you.
thought, absolutely. And I think that's such a meaningful choice now that I'm older, and obviously I could reflect upon it. But when you were talking about just allowing a child to know that they matter, I think is so critical, especially today. Like I said, when we have so many distractions, so many, noise, this and that, but to really remain focused on each other too, as well. Having the phone set aside during dinner, that's something my husband and I do all the time to
Yep.
ensure that there's, that eye contact that's demonstrating just respect for that person. How was your day? Let's talk. But I feel like it's almost become, you really have to think about things like that today. Whereas at least growing up in my childhood through my young adulthood, it didn't seem as if it was like you had to choose that. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's also, I feel like we almost started going back in my day,
I always feel like that now.
What we didn't have though was digital deluge.
Yeah.
We didn't have the rate of information that we do now. And that's why it's so critical to have conversations with people face to face, whether particularly in your immediate circle, you need to be holding those conversations because there are so many distractions, and that's the value now. Is your skill set is dictating your attention to where you want it to go. Don't get me wrong; we can all doom scroll. That's fine. That you can do that. But if you're doing that every day and avoiding doing what you should be doing, well, then that's not good attention. But that's really easy, and you watch that. And not just in kids, you watch that in adults.
Sure.
The research is coming through now. There's a book by Jonathan Haidt, professor, and it talks about the anxious generation. And he has pulled apart and used the data of the damage social media does on young teenagers as they're developing their social skills. Because teenage years are awkward, but they're being constantly now bombarded with this digital presence they must achieve. I mean, it's near impossible, and we wonder why the rates of general anxiety is going through the roof. Is because they're seeing these messages constantly on their phone
Sure.
of how they should be, and you can't ever live up to the shoulds. You can aspire to get better. But if
Right.
we're telling these kids that this is what you should do to be successful, or you should look like this, what a terrible message to keep sending our children and the next generation. And that's why it's really a conscious decision. Like here in Australia, we're already pushing to legislations going forward now to restrict the age of access to social media to under 16, so that kids under the age of 16, and that's an Australia-wide, they're going through the process now of putting that in place. Now, it'll be messy, it won't be perfect, but they've listened to the research and said, we can no longer give this to children if we know it's doing harm. It'd be like saying, oh, kid, you don't need to wear your seatbelt. We know it's wrong. We have to put on a seatbelt to save children, right? The kid doesn't know they need to wear a seatbelt. And the research has shown that this has been a really damaging social experiment on our children. So we now know better. So now we will learn to do better. And Jonathan Haidt has been pushing wonderfully in America, and let's see what happens. But already in countries around the world. My children went to a school where the phone was banned. You just couldn't have it. So they've actually had a really good relationship with technology because you just can't have it at school. So between 9 and 3, they had no access to their phones. And that's been good.
I think that's incredible. And honestly, like I've always been very interested in the psychological effects of social media, especially youth. And 100%, I know exactly what book you're talking about. I read it like exactly when it came out. But when he even speaks about the play-based childhood versus the
Yes.
phone-based childhood, I always reflect upon my time growing up. And the one thing I could say is the memories that I have, for example, on a weekend, of course, school and everything else, sports during the week, but on the weekends, our next door neighbor, there was two boys, a very, very young girl. I didn't actually get to speak with her because she was like a baby at the time, but The two boys and I, as soon as the garage door would go up, whatever, 9 o'clock in the
Have to go.
morning, it was, I'm telling you, Jeff, I mean, you had to like cut me off at 5 p.m. for like dinner. But we had so much fun, and it was a lot of physical activity too. Of course, building muscle, riding a bike.
Yep.
We would stack up, and I've mentioned this actually on another podcast, but it was, I know Jonathan Haidt also talks about the risk too involved,
Yeah.
but we would ride bikes. We would create these like wooden blocks, like to like soar up in the air. And my dad would come out and he's like, "You're going to injure yourself. You're going to," and I'm like, "Okay." I'd look at the boys and I'd be like, "Okay, let's go just a little bit higher." And then I got to go in. But it was this idea. It was risk taking. But you were out, you were socializing, and even times like conflict resolution at a very
Yes.
young age. If you got in a minor argument or something, you learned how to work through that at 10, 11, 12 years old, which I think are critical skills now that as I reflect back. But as we move forward in this conversation, this is an area I'm just fascinated about. And I'd love to hear, like I said, just more from your expertise. But as we move forward now, from like childhood, are we seeing anything with adults with those anxiety, depression levels? Is there any evidence right now? Because I know a lot of the focus, obviously, in his book was more like young, like childhood. So, are we seeing anything more now with
So
adults, even?
there's two things that are actually happening, and this is really, we're at an interesting point in our existence as human beings on this planet, where we
Mhm.
are changing our social structure,
Sure.
not by design. It's just changing, and the digital device is changing the way we interact with the world. There's no way of going back now. What we have to do
Right.
is put in the effective countermeasures. At the same time, what we're also getting is a generation coming through now who have really good emotional labeling. We have an older generation who only know happy, angry, and sad, or fine, to describe their feelings. And if someone's yelling fine at you, they're never fine. They're not okay. But
Sure.
we have this generational gap in language. So if you ask someone who's under 20, how do you feel? They will tell you exactly how they're feeling. They're feeling anxious, they're feeling upset, they're feeling worried, or they've got this, or
Mhm.
they're happy about this, or right. They have this emotional granularity. It's referred to as that they're able to label what's happening around them and how they feel about it. But then we have this other generation that doesn't have, were never given permission to express their feelings. Like there's a generation, and my generation would have heard, "Stop your crying, or I'll come in there and give you something to cry about."
Yes.
It's like, you can't say that nowadays, right? Right, right. So there's this gap between language models, and so we have the younger generation who have really effective labeling, and
Sure.
an older generation who are told to be quiet. And that's created a friction. It's not a generation friction. It's not a
Really?
generation gap. It's a language gap. And the younger generation know how to express it. So our job as being elders within any organization or any group, social
Mhm.
fabric, is how do we guide them with that language? We can't suppress it. I hear this, "Oh, you can't talk about this." And well, yeah, actually, yeah, we can. We have to talk about our feelings. We have to
Right.
do it in a way that is constructive,
Mhm.
acknowledges what that other person's feeling. And too much in business has been, it's nothing personal, it's only business.
Mhm.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, that everything in business is personal because it involves human beings.
Sure.
Our
And
social rejection, our social fabric is part of our mental construct, and it's how our brain operates. It's a social animal. We are wired for connection. That is who we are. That's why we create tribalism. Like, our group, the in group and the out group. Doesn't matter whether it's sport or in an office or wherever we are. We create groups because we're trying to find our tribe. The greatest thing to do is leave school. Because when you leave school, you're no longer stuck with the age limits. You suddenly
mhm.
go, do I like this person because they're like me? and have got similar interests, as opposed they're in they're a sophomore like I am, and I've got to stay within all the sophomore banding. Right? Think about it.
See, I think that's so interesting. And one question I had, this idea when you talk about just the language, when I was growing up, especially in sport, talking about mental health. Um, Mental health was definitely something that was never brought up, at least from my experience. I don't remember that terminology at all. And it was like you kind of mentioned it, but it was this. It was more authoritarian style coaching, and it was do as I say. If you ask questions, you could leave.
Yep.
Um, but at the same time, I look back and I look at how that molded me as a person, to persist, to have that grit, to move forward. And now I do feel that mental health, of course, is such a large topic of discussion. And like you said, certain individuals at certain age points are able to vocalize that more, their feelings, their emotions. But where is there like a healthy line that is drawn between, for example, maybe even a coach with being able to discipline, but then also taking emotions into consideration where there still can be productivity?
So if you're looking specifically at sport coaching, we're looking at once again, we're looking at a complete evolution. The
Sure.
authoritarian coach is no longer in most sports allowed. It's
Right.
changing. There's still pockets where it's like that, but the reality is there are better ways to get high performance out of athletes.
Hmm.
At one stage it was always go, 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 go. So now we know so much about rest and recovery.
Hmm.
Like in 20 years, the boom, like, and I do endurance cycling now. That's my thing. So
Oh,
raising
wow.
money for cancer research. And I do, there are some days we do 250 kilometers in a day, and we just keep, and we'll do that. There's a ride I've done, which we did in 8 days. So that's 1,000 miles. So 1,600 kilometers in 8 days. So rest
That's
and recovery is critical to that, how you rest and
mhm.
recover. But we're not even applying that to workplaces. We're
Yeah.
only just applying that type of thought process of the recovery process from an endurance athlete to work. Think
Sure.
about it. You go to work, you're told, do your job. You got, 9 to 5, whatever your hours
Mhm.
are, do
Sure.
go, 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 go. And some
Right.
businesses are tracking people every keystroke. Just think about the lack of trust in that company that is tracking your keystroke and your eye contact on your camera. Like
Wow.
there's devices that actually watch people. That's no trust for the employee. However, if you're looking at high performance, it's peaks and troughs, peaks and troughs. It's like little sprints and then recover, sprint, recover.
Sure.
That's the most efficient way to get high productivity out of someone. So if you go back to when we're talking about how do we get the best out of people, it's understanding that person and what works best for that person. We've come from command and control of do as you're told, I'm the authority,
Right.
to someone now saying, actually, no, you're not the authority. I've just Googled it and it says my recovery process should be this. Can you tell me what my recovery protocol is? Because you're not talking about my recovery protocol. What is it? So that's where information is power. And so the control and command is no longer in charge, or if they are, they're holding on to it really tightly because they're being replaced. They're being replaced
Mm.
by coaches who are all about getting to know their team and how do they get the best out of the individual within the team while still getting the whole team to perform. There are so many athletes who reach the pinnacle and then they crash
Yeah.
because they've
Hmm.
been single-minded focused to get the goal, thinking they will be happy when they get there. And it's called the arrival fallacy. If you're not happy on the way, you'll
Hmm.
never be happy when you get the goal. It'll actually feel underwhelming. Now, there's actually some neuroscience behind that, is that your brain's already reset and looking for the next goal because it's
Yeah.
always chasing a dopamine reward. So even when you get there, your brain's gone, oh yeah, you've done that, on to the next. And so if
Yeah.
you're conditioned, you get the award and go, I've got it. Right, what's next? Like, and you know what that's like when you win a championship or you win something, and instantly your brain goes, oh, that's lovely. What am I doing next? What am I chasing next?
Now I understand it because it's so true. I've spoken about this even in another podcast, but it's like you drive for whether that's months or years trying to achieve a goal. And once you get there for like a split second, you get that award that day, you're just like so excited you made it, but then the next day you're already on, okay, well then what's next now? So that totally makes sense. I'm glad I could literally understand the psychological effect that it has, because it seems like we're always in a rush to that next goal to obtain it, and also desiring instantaneous gratification.
Yeah.
That this overnight success is like such a thing. But of course, as we all know, it's not, but we want that. And it's just interesting you say that because that literally was just brought up in one particular podcast. But I wanted to know specifically when we talk about maybe more leadership style, you briefly mentioned it, understanding the individual. But have you seen, whether it's clients that come to your organizations, a particular style of leadership today that's been really effective in the workplace?
Well, what we're seeing emerging is we're going. There's a transition from the control and command type leadership of do as you're told, we're the bosses, be grateful for your job. Now, the pandemic was a catalyst for complete change.
Yeah.
Worldwide. It changed the way we work. It changed, the fact that you and I are having this conversation. Prior to the pandemic, it would have been, oh, why do I want to talk to someone like in America? That seems strange. Now I do it all week. That's just the new normal now. So the world has evolved. We're moving from moving from command and control to what we call trust and inspire. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a combination of using your head and your heart. So you're creating trust within those you're leading to inspire them to do better. You're not
Sure.
telling them that they have to do better and setting the KPIs they have to fight for, right? So you think about that
Mm-hmm.
goal setting.
Sure.
If you're just going for the goal, you'll only aim for the goal. But what about if you could have achieved more? Now, go back when I was talking about with my team and focusing on them and how do we care for them and how do we look after them? How do I measure their success based on them laughing? I want to hear them laughing because I know they're enjoying their work. So if I'd
Right.
followed the model of what I was expected for my bosses, in a
Right.
5-year period, we would have grown the business by about 25% over time, right? In the same period, I doubled our output. So
That's
we
incredible.
went nothing what they would have asked for. It was so much more because I was focusing on my people. I encouraged them to leave. If they had to go and have something, go. That's called life. Go and do whatever you need to do. I know you'll catch up on your work. So that's where you're trusting them to be human beings and to be good
Mm-hmm.
people, employ the right people and get them to enjoy where they work. And you're inspiring them to be better people.
That's it.
There's a quote by Gary Vaynerchuk, and it's
Yes.
be careful about your legacy. You're writing it every day.
Wow. That's
And
powerful.
that's a big thing for me. Going back to my why is to plant trees under whose shade I'll never sit. If I can help someone in Courtney Beck's audience see positivity as a way forward, because they're already looking at yours, your podcast, because it is about positivity. But if they can then go and explain that something we've talked about to someone else, isn't that what we're here for as human beings? I mean, I literally have a reminder on my study desk. I have a little Lego bonsai tree, and that's my inspiration that I'm here to plant trees. And positivity is a ripple of kindness. It goes out. So I have to give you this example when we talk about positivity. And
Sure.
it's always about coffee because I love coffee.
I
I
love
like
coffee.
beer, but it's a little bit weirder to have that during the day. Anyway, day drinking, you're not supposed to. So when you go to a coffee shop, a person is not wearing their name tag because they can't remember their name.
Right.
They're wearing it so you can engage and have a conversation. And when someone asks you for what your name is on a coffee order or whatever, and they don't have a name badge, ask them their name. Because what happens is when you have that social interaction, and it feels a bit awkward to start with, but once you get used to it, it's just perfectly normal. Guess what? You smile, they smile, the person behind them gets a smile. Not just us, the person behind them. Because as human beings, we're wired for connection. So that simple action of asking what their name is, it's not so you can complain to the manager, and it's not because they don't have Alzheimer's, they haven't forgotten their name, right? But if you have a conversation based on our name, and now the perfect example of we have our local coffee shop, new owners have been in there 18 months. They have trained all their staff to remember everyone's names where possible. And it's the most welcoming feeling, and we refer to it as Cheers, where everyone knows your name. You know, you can hear the piano playing now. Remember the TV show Cheers?
Yes,
And,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
and the theme song was Where Everybody Knows Your Name.
I was just gonna say, you reminded me of something as far as like an act of kindness, about perhaps like even drive-throughs.
Yeah,
This happened to me, and it was so interesting. It was always at the same Dunkin' Donuts. This was years ago, but I was still in sales, and I'd go through the Dunkin' Donuts line, obviously getting my breakfast in the morning, and the person in front of me would always buy my breakfast for me without, of course, me knowing. I didn't know who they were. I'm going through the drive-through. But then in return, it almost like triggers a reaction. Like, I don't, first off, I didn't need that, but I was looking behind me and I told the woman, go ahead, put theirs on,
yeah,
my tab. But it really was, it was an act of kindness, but it almost was like psychologically, it made me feel good about what somebody else had done for me. And I inevitably didn't even think twice. I wanted to do that for the people behind me. And so the kindness, the positivity, like you said, just the name tag, being able to interact. I think that's something, at least from my personal opinion, we really need to focus on today, because for me, I'm even more cognizant in how, like, making that choice, making that effort,
just make the
because
choice. Yeah.
yeah, well, and starting off with this podcast, the fact that you spoke about that, I think that was literally laid the foundation, because it's so true. Everything we do is a choice. But what a wonderful story, just from your perspective, like on the name tag and really the true meaning of that
Yeah.
too.
It's not for the Karens of the world to complain to the manager. That's not what it's about. Um, and and I do. So we need to remove random acts of kindness as a saying, and just be kind, right? It doesn't need to
Good
be a
point.
random act. You don't ever need to film it. I do love some of. I hate it when they're staged for social media. Like, I really find that
Yeah.
yes, they're doing wonderful things, but they're still manipulating the situation, and
Sure.
I'm torn between that. However, you do kind things because it makes you feel good. You can
Right.
never control how the other person is going to receive it or perceive it. That's not up to you. You do it because it makes you feel good. And we need
Right.
to remove the what's in it for me. We've been
Hmm.
conditioned to ask what's in it for me. Like, like there's a I can't remember who the quote's by, but it's to do with we have been taught by the advertisers and the retailers to love things and use people, but we
Mm.
really need to love people and use things. So there's
Uh,
this commercialization about getting more stuff, but like I said earlier, the stuff's not going to turn up at your funeral. You don't win at life. What you do is you surround yourself with the people that matter in your life, and that's a good life. So there's the Harvard longitudinal study. Have you heard about this one, Courtney? That
Is this the study on what actually makes you happy and its
the
social
good life.
connection?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
Waldinger. I think Waldinger and colleagues.
yeah. Robert Waldinger was and he was the last. There was 4 professors that ran it because it ran for
Yeah,
85 years. So it had Harvard
unbelievable.
students and some Boston locals were later their data was emerged, and it came down to the tightness of your social connections determined whether or not you had a good life. Like, isn't that what we're here for? Like, so when we were going to touch upon the concept of ikigai, right? So
Yes.
ikigai is being, what are you here for? So when we talk about our why, and if we refer Simon Sinek, and I actually talk to people about doing his book, Find Your Why, because it is actually a process of stepping down, and I've gone through it. And that's how I came up with, I'm here to plant trees, under whose shade I'll never sit, because that aligns with who I am. And it's consistent. Doesn't matter what I'm doing, right? But ikigai, as a Venn diagram with all the circles, is what do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? What do you get paid for? So it's 4 key components. What you're good at, what you enjoy, what the world needs, what you get paid for. But ultimately, if you step back one step further, the true meaning of ikigai is a good life. It's not about how much money you make. It's about, and so the oldest life expectancy on the planet, these places where they go and they talk to them, it's all about a sense of community, a sense of still got work to do. We're still part of this community. And there's a great thing on our local cricket field, and it's so good. And it just says, before you complain, have you volunteered yet?
Oh, I like
And
that.
because in our modern world, everyone complains and no one wants to help.
That's
So when
such a
did we get that wrong as a community? When do we stop getting involved? And this is what we've noticed with a decline in community activities because of an increase of a digital world. So people in their own communities are not contributing as much. It's harder to get volunteers. It's harder to get people to help out in local sporting clubs and things like that. Too many people are on the bleachers whinging and complaining rather than actually helping. And I've been a cricket coach, so I know what that feels like when you're actively doing something and there are people complaining rather than actually trying to help out and help the situation. So that's where, have we come up with a way of getting back to community? And I think that's what the digital world has made us lose a little bit. It's the people in our local area. What can you do to help someone in your street?
I think that's such a good point. I mean, even I always talk about like the 3 C's, for example, like communication, community, and connection.
Yes.
And I'm curious what your thoughts are. You briefly mentioned it, but when I was reflecting, it was literally as I would start this. This is kind of my thought process. But this idea where, as much as we are even more connected than ever, present day, with digital capabilities, it is almost as if we have more like disconnection almost.
Yes.
And so, what are your thoughts on that statement?
But it is, that's where the data's leading us, that we have this,
Mhm.
I can talk to anyone in the world and I can watch anything from anywhere in the world instantly. This is science fiction stuff. This is stuff you could never have imagined we could have the ability to watch anything about anything at any given time on a device that you hold in your hand. Like, that is godlike technology, right?
I know.
It really is. But we're still trying to work out how to get on with our neighbour.
Same.
Now, I'm not. I live in a cul-de-sac where we've got wonderful neighbours, right? And I'm a big part of that. And but so I'll use an American example, which is I as an Australian, I find that really, really strange. Homeowners Association and the rules and
Oh,
regulations. So we
yeah.
don't get that here. We don't have that here. We have
Oh,
communities. So we just don't have that. And to us, that's foreign, of someone coming in and giving you a written warning or a fine or getting, like, we just don't have that. And what that is that's actually a form of social isolation and trying to keep their tribe and keep people out who don't conform. Now, it's gone a little bit too far, right? So when you look at a community and how do it's about in real life. There's
Mhm.
8 billion people on this planet. So who are you interacting with in real life? Because
Mhm.
that's the social connection and the social bond. that makes a difference. Having people digitally, it's great and it's really good. But it's who are you talking to? Who's in your circle? Who are your friends you've spoken to? It's not the number of friends that matter. It's
Right.
how often you practice friendship.
Right.
So even if you've only got 2 really strong friends, but you practice friendship with them every day, you check in, you ask how they're feeling, you talk
Mhm.
about your day, whatever, you only need 2 good friends in your life. You can have a great life. What we're taught is, oh, you've got to have all these friends. But then you don't really know anyone, so you don't actually create a deeper bond and connection with them. That's why it's important that it's the real life interactions with your people.
That's so interesting to me. And I mean, just even being, of course, like respectful of your time, I have two questions.
That's okay.
Um, but as you speak about like the connection, um, feeling a sense of meaning in person, focusing on friendships, I'm very interested in the perception as if people have got maybe it is more on the digital realm that's maybe been extracted to the physical realm, but this idea of more like angriness, it's like very on social media, the cancel culture that we have seen. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Is it in fact that people are more angry today, or is it the digital influence that maybe has had on that?
So I'm a science experiment of one. There's just one of me. However,
Mm-hmm.
I write every day on LinkedIn. A good mate of mine some years ago, when I left the motor industry, said you should write on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn every day. It's a really good place as a journal as well, an electronic journal. So I
Sure.
just write on reflections and things that I'm curious about, things that I see. Courtney, I don't get any negative comments on what I
Mm-hmm.
write because
Sure.
I'm constantly putting out a level of positivity.
Sure.
I might get one counter thought process that every few months, maybe,
Sure.
if that's about, I just don't get any negativity. Yet if you
Mm-hmm.
go onto other platforms, the minute you write something, there's someone negatively making a statement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to do with the type of platform and what you're putting on it and what you're doing.
Sure.
Ultimately, you have to make a choice, and we go back to that choice.
Yep.
Is
Mm-hmm.
the opinion of a complete stranger worth anything to you?
That's a
And
good
when you
point.
understand your negativity bias will always remind you of that one bad comment. It will ignore the 99 other good comments and just mean you focus on the one bad comment. True?
That's so true. Because I think that whole idea of cancel culture, we all make mistakes. And that was something that I was starting to become more interested in, is how an individual can make a mistake, within reason, of course. But how like reputation, how a mistake could lead to something so like, expanded, that what it shouldn't be, and how that's evolved. Are we like leaning kind of out of that now of cancel culture? Are you seeing?
Well, there's a change in once again, there's a change in the social fabric happening, and it'll come through the next 12 months, 2 years will be quite a interesting change with AI coming into business. So
Yes.
AI is now being integrated in business. The reality is that we still have responsibility to our fellow human being to have an interaction.
Yeah.
That's the part that I think we're missing the point. And if you're in a hustle, busy culture, you're not stopping to acknowledge the person around you, the people serving you, the people that you're walking past.
Hmm.
We're okay. So here in Australia, we're a little bit different. We will give people a nod or a little wave, right? We're pretty cash, like, right. I'm walking my dog every morning. There's a guy who lives a couple of streets over. I've walked my dog past him on the opposite side of the road because our dogs don't like each other because dogs do that. We nod every day, and if we drive past each other, we'll just give a wave, right? We don't know each other's name, but it's that human interaction. It's that, right? I want to give you an idea of how a digital experience can alter perception and your reality. So the musical Hamilton was here in Australia. My daughter and I, we love musicals. We go to that. So I go to rock concerts with my son, go to musicals with my daughter. I get the balance everything. Hamilton was playing here in Australia. So I'm here in Brisbane, Australia.
Yeah.
Now, there was a story and some press, this was last year, talking about in history that Eliza Hamilton had slaves, right? So just think about this. Hamilton is a musical. It uses historical references, but it's made up of a rap. It's all people of color presented in different shapes and sizes. It's not a direct representation of what Alexander Hamilton did in his life. Yet, a woman in Brisbane yelled out in the middle of a concert, she had slaves. And everyone told her to very politely to be quiet, but we're Australians, so we don't do polite like that. We use some other words. This woman felt so aggrieved to yell out at a live music theatre about perceived outrage from something from 1776 or whatever year it was. Now, that's only because of social media. That's just wrong. That's just a waste of energy in the universe and in the planet of someone being so outraged here in Australia that at a concert in Brisbane, there's not even her history. There's nothing to do with her country at all. It's from someone in America. And you don't know the facts because none of us were there. And it's a made-up musical with people rapping and dancing and right? That's what the digital influence is happening around the world. And that's why when you talk about cancel culture, it's fixed a lot of problems. But then there's almost like it went too far because you're getting people outraged all around the world for stuff that really isn't in their radar, shouldn't be on their radar. It's nothing to do with them. And that's like I said before about at the local club. Before you complain, have you volunteered yet? So before we get outraged over everything, because that's your negativity bias at play and being manipulated by the social media algorithms because they know outrage sells. And it's all about selling advertising space. That outrage is misplaced unless you're contributing in your own community. But there's no boundaries on who I can complain on in social media around the world if I really wanted to. But, that'd be a terrible life.
Well, and that just kind of brings up the fact, I mean, talking about online reviews, for example, for businesses, for individuals, the one thing I've always thought of and the way I was literally raised was if in fact there is an issue that arises or a challenge between two individuals, go to the source, right? Go to the source, talk it out. And now, I mean, sometimes I'm on reviews and I mean, you would be, I know you see it too, but it's like you'd be amazed by such negativity towards an individual. And I'm thinking like, I don't know, like, think big picture. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe something was going off or, in their personal life and it was brought into their business setting. But to have something on the internet like that, I just don't believe in it. I don't believe in writing like horrific reviews and stuff. I don't think there's any value in that. I think there is value in speaking to the source that maybe you did have a bad experience, but you're able to work it out without humiliating somebody. And like I said, having that on the internet for, the rest of time. But that's such a good point. And thank you for elaborating on that. And Jeff, I just want to end on a positive note. So if you have anything, whether it's a positive phrase or a positive quote, I would be so grateful to hear what that is.
Well, it's something I share quite a lot, and we've spoken about the choice, right? It's always about the choice. There's a couple of amazing books written by survivors of Auschwitz. So Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. There's another book called The Gift, and she's written another book called The Choice, and that's by Edith Eger. And then there's an Australian survivor. His name was Eddie Jacku, and he wrote The Happiest Man on Earth. These people went through horrendous things. Their stories are just horrible, and they always chose happiness. Now, isn't that a legacy that you want to be remembered for? That's what it is. And so, what my thing, I say, I'm an optimist, but that doesn't stop the bad stuff of life happening.
Right.
But it is my choice what I do to it and do with it, and that's it. It's a choice, and that's why everything I write every day on LinkedIn. That's my part of who I am now. That's just a daily habit. I finish everything I do with "stay awesome" and "stay kind," and that's a reminder to me that that's my choice, and it's me putting it out to everyone else that that's my. And I type it. I don't copy and paste it. I deliberately make sure I type it every time. Stay awesome. Stay kind. So if you want to finish on something, let's finish on that.
Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, all your knowledge within the realm of neuroscience, leadership, of course, and positivity. And that is certainly one thing that I'm going to take from this podcast, among the many things, but that it is all about a choice. So, Jeff, once again, thank you for taking the time to be on this podcast.
My pleasure, Courtney. Stay awesome. Stay kind.